So last night, the Toronto Maple Leafs season came to an end after a 3-2 OT loss to the Panthers, and I think for the first time in like almost 4 years, we will see some actual change. Because while this was the most successful season under the current regime, snapping the longest playoff series win drought in the entire league, it is still an abject failure of a season. They lost in pretty embarrassing fashion to the Florida Panthers, and don't get me wrong, the Florida Panthers are playing fantastic, but this was the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference. They should have won this series, at least win 6 or 7. And I don't think this series ending so early was that misleading. I think Florida was the better, more prepared team that wanted it more. So let's start out with the obvious one. Sheldon Keith should be fired. In this year's playoffs, honestly, I didn't even think they outplayed Tampa. They just found a way to pull through. And in the Panthers series, they didn't really show up, and he was outcoached by Paul Maurice. He's now had 4 playoff runs with the squad and only 1 playoff series win. Goodbye. And again, I'm not saying Keith is a horrendous coach. He's a pretty decent one, but the room clearly needs a new voice after how they looked in this series. Sheldon Keith type coaches are not a rarity in this league. They'll be fine moving on and will not regret it. Kyle Dubas, on the other hand, that is a tough one. He assembled what on paper was a cup level team with multiple successful deadline acquisitions. But what failed him in this series was not those trade deadline acquisitions. It was his 3 superstars, Marner, Matthews, and Tavares, making a combined $33.5 million, and in the second round had 1 combined goal. Deadline acquisitions can help put your team over, but if your big boys are not cooking like those 3 stars on the Leafs, you're toast. And don't get me wrong, some of that blame does fall on Dubas because he was the one that signed all 3 of them to massive contracts. So now, as a result, Dubas does not have a contract extension in place, so honestly, I think they will let him go. And honestly, good for Dubas. Instead of dealing with the Toronto Maple Leafs and a bunch of playoff chokers, he can either go to Pittsburgh, get an absolute bag, or go to a young rebuilding team that he can turn into a contender. Now, in terms of on-the-ice changes, I honestly don't think they're going to be able to do much regarding the core. William Nylander should not be traded. He is making $6.9 million. That is one of the best contracts in the entire league. It would make no sense to trade him. Morgan Riley legitimately played the best hockey of his entire career during these playoffs. Why trade him now? Mitch Marner, I don't think anybody will be willing to part ways with an equal caliber superstar, so you'd probably just end up getting 2 good $5 to $6 million players instead of someone to replace him. Austin Matthews, you just do not even entertain trading unless he comes into your office and says, I am not re-signing next summer. This dude's value is at an all-time low of the past 2 years. We forget that he won the Hart last year. And then finally, John Tavares, and obviously the contract is untradeable unless you attach a shit ton of picks and prospects to it. So I think the only big moves that should go down is get rid of the coach, get rid of the GM, and Shanahan as well. Leafs fans might hate to hear it, but the core should stay intact for next year. It took Colorado a decent amount of time to get out of the second round, and look how long it took the Capitals. I can't blame them for being mad, but this still is a 110-point team that did take a positive step this year in the playoffs. So see if the core can build off this and take another step, making the Eastern Conference Finals or the Cup Finals next year. And if they're a first-round exit again, then maybe blow it up.